All right, good. So I put the slides in order of basically the chronology of the various series, though they might jump around within the series. And I just pulled up a few examples of each. I thought we could just start talking about the early series in Vietnam. And I'm sure people are eager to know about how it was that your family emigrated to the United States as political refugees and how that all came together.
It's a really long, complicated story. But basically, we were evacuated in 1975. My parents did not work for an American organization, but through friends, we got on the list to be evacuated and left were evacuated in actually a C-130 plane. And I never really thought about it until recently when I actually was on a C-130 transport plane for work and realized that maybe that's where my obsession comes from. We were evacuated, and I think first to the Philippines and then to Guam, and then we were given the choice once we were in Camp Pendleton whether we wanted to go anywhere else in the world or stay in the United States. Both my parents were educated in France, and we actually had lived in France as children for a few years. So we were fluent in French, and it seemed that the obvious next step would be to go back to France, but somehow my parents had the presence of mind to say, oh no, we will stay here in the United States, and we stayed. And otherwise, I don't think I would have become a photographer.
Probably.
Yeah.
So then after you fell in love with photography during your studies to get a degree in biology, as I understand it, because the drawing class was full. Love that story. After you finished at Yale, you decided to go back to Vietnam. Can you sort of summarize those trips a bit?
The United States renewed relations with Vietnam, and the economic embargo was lifted, and so the possibility of returning to Vietnam became real. And so that was 1994, 95, and I left in 1975, so 20 years. And with a lot of trepidation, I received a travel grant and went back to Vietnam. And I really had no idea what I would be doing. I got trashed around quite a bit when I was in graduate school. You know, I came in using the view camera, the 4x5 format, photographing workshops and the European craftsmen and their work. And I was told to stop working indoors, to go outside, to make portraits. And I actually tried a bit of landscape and got completely demolished in a critique and thought, oh, I'm not a landscape photographer. I have to figure out something else. And so I started making these still lives that incorporated old pictures of Vietnam taken by the French, this glassware that I found in a chemistry workshop, and they were kind of unusual. So I thought I would go back to Vietnam and collect more objects and make more photographs. But as soon as I arrived in Vietnam, all I wanted to do was make these landscapes. And so I hired this young man to drive me in a motorcycle, and I would sit in the back, and we'd just drive through the countryside, and I would say, okay, stop here, and then we'll stop and make a picture and go on. So basically, I made pictures that somehow would make tangible these ideas that I'd had of what it would have been like to have a normal childhood in Vietnam, or uninterrupted childhood in Vietnam. I'd heard tons of stories while we were living in France or in the United States about the childhood my grandmother had or my mother had in the northern part of Vietnam, which I didn't know. I read a lot of folk tales, and so I had this idea of what life could have been in Vietnam, and I wanted to make those things tangible. But of course, it's contemporary Vietnam, and it's very different. But I did look for those things.
What's going on with these guys in this picture?
That's sort of my little homage to Ajay. It's solar eclipse.
Okay.
In Ho Chi Minh City.
When I first saw it, I thought nuclear test on Bikini
Yes.
Atoll, or
Yes.
so I went war immediately,
Yes.
of course.
And this is one of the later pictures I made. I worked in Vietnam for about 4 or 5 years.
All right, and then this one is sort of that intersection of, countryside, people in these tiny little boats with these giant billboards, like whammo in your face, modern life. I just thought so unpicturesque.
Yeah, it's a lot of the contradictions that you find in Vietnam and in many countries in Asia still, you have the traditional way of life in the river, and then you have all of these new high-tech companies arriving in the horizon.
Yeah, I love that one. This one's in the exhibition. Some of the pictures you see are not in the exhibition, so don't come expecting to see everything you'll see on screen, just a warning to you. But this one is in the exhibition.
Yeah, these are toy airplanes that are actually in a grave site, and apparently it's in the northern parts of the northern central parts of Vietnam, where the Montagnard people live, and apparently the planes are there to help bring the spirits faster to the other world. But I was interested in the planes for obviously other reasons.
And you've said that you were purposely not focusing on images that were directly war-related, but then there's always this sort of layer on top of these.
Yeah, I think all of these were made towards the end on my last trip, where I felt that I've exhausted some of the agenda that I had previously, and I was itching to actually deal with the issue of war, or the Vietnam War.
Right. Because this one, for me, is unavoidable, as is this one, which is also in the show. This is the final shot you took on your last trip?
It's one of the last
Yeah.
shots, yes.
Those are kites.
Yeah, those are kites, and it's right outside of Ho Chi Minh City in a new development zone, so there were no electrical poles, no telephone poles, and back then there was very little entertainment, and television's not that great. So whatever people could do to keep themselves busy, they would go for it. So someone started flying kites, and within a week, hundreds of people came to fly kites.
Mm.
And of course, trash is constantly being burned, and I just thought it was just perfect.
Oh, I didn't realize that was trash burning.
Yeah, it's trash burning in the
Oh,
back.
okay. Huh. All right. And then, so moving forward, after these Vietnam trips, you turned to a group of Vietnam reenactors in North Carolina and Virginia, right? How did you tackle that as your second series?
I knew I wanted to address the issue of the Vietnam War, at least its memory of it or its effect on my personal life. And it's very difficult as a photographer who wants to work in the real world. And I was lucky to have learned through a friend that they were actually men who reenact the Vietnam War as an extension of having reenacted the Civil War and then World War II. They wanted something more contemporary, and so this was in 1999-2000, and they came upon Vietnam. I did a search on the internet, and there were more than one groups, and I found this one particular group in North Carolina, and it was the closest to New York. So I contacted them and thought that it could have great potential for a new project.
And so I've always been wondering about how that airplane landed in the North Carolina forest.
This Vietnam Aerojet was actually in, I think this was in Virginia, perhaps. I forget the name of some fort, some army base that these reenactors got access to because they knew of the plane, and so they staged this entire event around the downed jet.
Oh, gosh. So these guys are everyone gets this, they're all play acting, nobody's dead, they're hanging out of the plane, they're out for a weekend with the guys, and they're playing war. This one's great. You just told us this morning this was an exposure of 15 minutes?
Something like that, yes.
So this is many things are happening at the same moment, well, captured on film.
Yeah, they have, these reenactments take place over a weekend, so you arrive on a Friday night and you leave on Sunday. So they have these night battles on Saturday night and Sunday and Friday night. And I'm always praying that it doesn't rain so that they would actually have it. They have homemade explosive and mortars and flares, and they use everything that they have. And it's probably the event that comes closest to what I remember of war, partly because of the explosions sounding so real, the wait between an explosion and the next one, that anticipation, and the sound of the crickets and all of the animals that you hear in the forest while you're waiting.
And what was the part about the kitty litter?
The mortars are filled with kitty litter. They don't use paintball for any of these events. So the mortars are filled with kitty litter, so if you receive it on you, that means that you were hit.
Yeah, so.
Yeah.
Oh. I mean, really, to me, call me liberal, but, you know, like, why in the world would these guys be? It's so fascinating to me that this is a thing.
Well, yeah.
It's just, I can't get over it.
It's such a controversial war that you would think, why would anyone want to mess with this? But I think it just talks about the myth of Vietnam and the Vietnam War and how huge it is and how it's still so unresolved in people's imagination and how it represents something. I mean, you walk into a bookstore and there's still,
Still writing about it.
shelves and shelves of books. And then some of the best war movies are about the Vietnam War.
We'll talk about movies soon, because the movie aspect of everyone's ideas about war comes into play later. But let's talk about this one. That's you in the picture.
Yes, it's me, and I don't necessarily relish or have pleasure in being in the picture myself, but you know, there was no one else available. So I had a list of what I wanted to photograph and have done by the end of each reenactment, and definitely one of them was the idea of the sniper girl, you know, of course, from Full Metal Jacket and all those other movies. So I tried many different versions, you know, on the beach, in the field, in the forest, and I particularly loved it because for once I was in control, and those guys necessarily did not enjoy it, but they obliged.
But I love the idea of you being sort of the surprise guest of the weekend, that because you have Vietnam ethnicity, that you could pop out and lend a verisimilitude to the proceedings that couldn't have been achieved in any other way. Like the idea of this play acting, that just one step further would make it that much better for everybody.
Yeah, well, originally, you know, for a lot of my work, my fear is always to not have access. And I didn't think that these guys would invite me. It's just my personal invitation. It's on somebody's private land. So I really thought that I would have a hard time. I would not be invited. And as soon as I arrived, I realized that I was the most authentic thing that they had. I was more authentic. I was much better than an AK-47 or the plane, yes. And so I was a real asset. And the guys took great pride in putting together an exciting weekend. And I always came into play. I was the surprise guest.
And this one's good also to talk about the idea of the landscape being an actor, a player in the scenario or in any war, that you know, the landscape can really inhibit the attack, or it can help you if you're the person who knows it better, or the team.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up watching the Vietnam War movies and always noticed the landscape and until, well, I don't think that any real good war movies have been made in Vietnam. Other movies have been made, but they were always shot in Malaysia, in the Philippines, because Vietnam was still a socialist country and was closed. But I could tell immediately from looking at the rice field, from looking at the shape of the palm trees. And so that idea of another landscape playing the Vietnamese landscape, or North Carolina being a character in this particular series was fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Everyone gets that's the coast, that's the Outer Banks, right? And then we haven't talked about portraits, and in the show at the BMA, we focused in on landscapes because that seems to be, I think, your sort of biggest abiding interest,
Yes.
is at tackling the landscapes. But you have gone into portraiture in some senses, and you could do a great show, actually, of portraits. And so I love this guy, and he looks so real, and then you know, once you know what the series is and what's going on, you go, oh, wait, hold on. And the whole sort of, I just can't get over it.
Yeah, no, they go through such great lengths, you know, with the length of the haircut, the watch, the if they had glasses, it had to be 60s, you know, or those, what are they called? BCs, birth controls, because they're so ugly and they're like But, and he looks so vulnerable at the same time. And it's interesting because I have another portrait that is not in the book of another young soldier, just as handsome and as vulnerable, but he's a real soldier later. Actually, we should show those two
I
together.
think I
sometime.
have
Do
him
you have
in
him?
the slide.
We're holding the two,
Yes, I do, because he's key to
the two berettas.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, so we're moving on to now the third series. These are shot at Twentynine Palms, which is the Marine Air Corps training base in California. It's about 140 miles from LA. So you get this desert landscape there that has been used for, I didn't know this, but they'd been training out there
Since the 60s.
So for the Vietnam veterans had trained there as well as these guys who were there training to be deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan. So, you want to tell us about this one?
Yes, so just about when I was getting frustrated and feeling I was done and over with the reenactors and that it was a little silly, then the real war started and we invaded Iraq. And so I wanted to become an embed and was not able to go to Iraq. While I was doing my research, I came across these pictures of the Marine Corps training near Palm Springs. And the landscape looked like parts of Afghanistan or Iraq. And I thought, well, I should just try to go there and make some pictures. And I gained access to that installation and spent 3 or 4 years photographing their exercises there. It's live fire, so you have to wear a flak jacket and helmets. And any of the tenure of the training changed. So in 2003, the year we invaded, and I was there, this picture was made. So the Marine Corps was concerned with moving equipment and bodies and across the landscape. And within a year or so, it changed into more of sort of city training and urban training. I love the landscape, and this could look like the back lot of a
That's where we're going.
Hollywood set.
Are these shipping containers or are these just plywood
They're just
constructions?
plywood
Yeah.
constructions.
So
And
they do these whole scenarios out there for these
Yeah.
guys to learn how to fight, house to house.
but back then it was very rudimentary, and then suddenly they had Arab linguists and. But anyway.
Well, right. So then there are these wonderful images that didn't make it in the show for a variety of reasons, but when you start picking apart each of the characters in these images, you suddenly see the guy leaning against the building sort of casually with this gas mask on, and some of them, they're Marines that are dressed up as Iraqis, and then there's the Marines who are dressed up as Marines, and so they do these scenarios, and they've graffitied the walls with kill Bush and go away Uncle Sam or whatever, and the whole kind of Hollywood backlot aspect of it has just always hit home for me.
Yeah, and I just love the graffiti. And when you think about the Pentagon paying for,
Yeah.
and this was in 2004, so the training became much more intricate within a year. They actually built a minaret. They have these stalls and markets that are much more
Authentic.
authentic.
Yeah.
Yes.
So here's that portrait of Corporal Hepper.
Yeah, so he's holding 2 Berettas. You're only supposed to have one, and he was running around brandishing them. And I immediately think of the other young men as well. They're both.
They look like they
handsome.
could be cousins,
They
really.
could, or they could be it could be an extra in Saving Private Ryan or anything. But he must have seen a John Woo movie because that's what he was doing.
Yeah, so
And he had never been to Iraq. This was his first time. So it really broke my heart to think about what
Right.
he was going to encounter.
right.
Um,
Well, that's the thing that I love about Ann Mee's photographs. They're all of these layers, and for this guy, he's a trainee, so he doesn't know he hasn't gotten to where he's going to get. Right? He could die. He knows that part, but he's acting like a movie actor. So it's life imitating art, which imitates the life. Which it just goes on and on and on. These sort of layers of artifice and practice and pretend and play role. It's incredible, and that he's out there quoting movies, and they're so innocent, and it's like they think they're invincible and the guy's going to yell cut and they'll get to do it over, or they're in a video game and they'll get to start over and get all their health points back or something. It's just, it kills me. This one, this is not Anne-Me's work. I should make that very clear. This is a work that appeared in the war photography exhibition that's now at Brooklyn, which Anne-Me has 2 photographs in. And when we went to see the show, it was just at the Corcoran this summer, this one stopped me in my tracks, and this sort of idea that G.I. Joe is going to save you, or he's your talisman. I mean, I can understand the need to carry something with you, but it just gets at that whole idea of, you know.
But, you know, in a way, G.I. Joe did save me.
Say more.
Well, no, I mean, I think people always wanted to know, well, why is the work in a way so neutral? You know, why is it not more against the war or for the war or something? But I think I like being in that neutral zone because I feel conflicted about the U.S. military. I mean, obviously, I was saved and taken out and evacuated, even though, you know, I mean, the Americans did make the mess, did worsen the mess in Vietnam. I was evacuated, and I think I was saved from perhaps going to re-education camp and God knows what else in Vietnam if we had stayed. And then at the same time, I am so aware of what has been done to Vietnam and what is being done right now. So it's all of those issues that I hope to bring up in the work.
So I put this one in there so that we could sort of make the point about the equipment you use. It's a large format camera, obviously, but can you this morning you described for me sort of the ins and outs of how laborious it is. You don't just go and move on.
Yeah, I mean, I use this camera not for fetishistic reasons, you know. Some people like old things and some people have particular reasons for that. I use it because of the end result of the kind of prints and the kind of definition, the kind of sharpness, the separation in the colors, the three-dimensional and experiential aspect that you can get from a print. Eventually, I think there will be a digital camera that will provide that. I mean, it's very close right now, but it's not quite the same yet. And I will switch. So the camera is cumbersome to use. It's on a tripod because you're shooting at slower shutter speed. The lens is separate from the back, and you don't have roll film when you can shoot 36 exposures or unlimited exposures with a digital, with a chip. I can shoot 2 sheets of film, so I have a holder that goes into the back of my camera, and on one side is 1 sheet of film, I pull it out, and on the other side I have another sheet. But before I can do all of that, I have to put on a dark cloth and sort of focus on my ground glass. There's no mirror, there's no viewfinder. My viewfinder is the ground glass. So after I'm done with that, I have to do everything manually. I have to close down my lens, and then I have to measure the light, then I have to grab my film and put it in. So by the time you have framed your image and do everything else, everything has changed in front of you. So you sort of have to imagine, project the frame and kind of remember where it ends, and then remember what goes in, what goes out of your frame. And so it's kind of a hard camera to use, especially when you want to photograph the military.
Okay, let's move to that one first, because this one sounded like it was incredibly difficult to...
Yeah, this was one of those things that you do not want to do with a view camera.
But she did.
But I did. I guess it was kind of flexing the muscle. You know, I can do it. First of all, you know, you don't have the plane. Well, I guess you could call in the helicopter like Francis Ford Coppola and ask him to hover right there. But I couldn't do that, obviously, and it's taxpayers' money. So I had to imagine that the helicopter would be at a certain point because I knew they were coming. And so focus there. And then, you know, you don't
you're focusing at nothing.
Yeah, you're focusing on nothing because there's nothing, there's
something.
not even a tree that you can kind of move to and focus and come back. Your depth of field is really shallow because you need high shutter speed if you know photography to capture something that's moving. And then you have to kind of gauge when it would be at the horizon because you're not looking through the lens when you're taking the picture. But it all worked out, and it's kind of a miracle. It's so miraculous that most people think it was photoshopped in. But it wasn't.
You use Photoshop to do some
Yes,
small things, but
I
not,
actually scan the negative. I'm not, abiding to old traditions, and I'm not a 19th century photographer in that sense. I scan my negs on a drum scan, and then I make inkjet prints.
let's go back to that one for 1 second. This one and the one of the helicopter hovering are both in the exhibition, and this one is, because it's an interior, one could say one of these things is not like the other. But when we started taking a good hard look, these are two shelves, one on top of the other, and it's the decks of the aircraft, or the destroyer, not a destroyer, what is this one?
It's a battleship.
A
It's sort of a
battleship.
small aircraft carrier. It's
So
not an
the guy in this chair is tasked with moving the aircraft around with as few moves as possible. So each one has a little, model guy. And then there are these push pins and nuts, wing nuts, and various pieces of hardware that are holding them down. But it's those red push pins that was the punctum for me, the sort of battleship stratego aspect of this whole scenario that got me. That in the end, it really is almost a game.
Yeah, so the play and real life is
Yeah. Yeah.
very close together.
It's so hard. I mean, on the one hand, the military is there to protect the country. It does all of those wonderful things, gathers everybody together, rah, rah, we're the best, we're proud, we're all of those wonderful things. But at the same time, you know that down at the end of the line is going to be death and destruction. So it's this really hard. I mean, I can raise the flag in my front yard is faster than most, probably. My father served in Korea, and whatever. So I was raised in that fashion. So I sit firmly on that rooftop with you. I can go both ways on it. It's a tough one. This was the one that actually I think the first picture I saw of yours come across, I forget where, and I stopped in my tracks and thought, what is up with the lounge chair on the deck of this is an oil rig that they're protecting with this gun, like, what, ha, ha, ha. And that was my introduction to your work, was this picture. It's still a favorite.
Yeah, I mean, it was. I saw that picture, and I said, I have to take that picture. It was actually really difficult to photograph on that rig. They were so concerned about showing the organization of where everything was. Somehow, they thought that
Security.
it would infringe upon the security. But for some reason, they didn't mind this. And I love the presence of domesticity on this location, and of course the contrast between the weapon and that amazing sunset. But there's a reason for the lawn chair and the desk. I'm pretty sure it's a Martha Stewart line, and it came from the United States. And it came in a container with all of the other gear. And of course, they could have used plastic, which is what you could find in Kuwait, but it would have been too light and would have flown away. And this metal also, but it would have rusted. So
the wood is perfect weight to stay on the deck. It's kind of crazy. So here's one of the portraits, not in the show. She's an arresting, what does it say? Arresting gear
technician.
And those are the guys who catch the planes, right?
Yes, and the cable, you can actually see the tube for the cable on her left side.
So she's below and
She's below deck, yes.
Huh.
It's amazing. I photograph men and women, but it seemed that the pictures of women are much more successful. And I'm just so compelled by them, and I find them so fascinating. And they do jobs that men used to do. They're extremely competent, just as competent. But they have to sort of find their place, and some decide to be like one of the guys. And I run across her, and she had plucked eyebrows, and everyone else wears these shirts that are kind of loose, and she found one that is completely fitted. Maybe she sewed the side, and then of course the Scarlet A. So I thought it was terrific.
So I wanted to talk about her, but I also wanted to point out the green shirt for the arresting gear, and this shows you the various colors in shirts that get worn on the deck. This is an FOD walk, which is foreign object detection. Thank you. And so all of those colors are different jobs, and I wrote them down because I couldn't remember them all. We don't have any purple guys, but they're the aviation and fueling guys. The blue shirts are the plane handlers and elevator operators. The green shirts are catapult and arresting gear and the hook runners. Yellow guys are aircraft handling and plane directors. Red is ordnance and crash crew. Brown is air wing captains, and the white are both quality control and inspections, landing signals, and then also medical personnel. So, everybody on the deck has a job and a role, and they're very clearly delineated for a good reason.
Yeah, for safety reasons. I mean, the flight deck, as I know, is one of the most dangerous workplace in the world. And this is just a way for them to keep track of everything. And of course, there are no colors on a battleship. It's not camouflage, but it's that gray that melds into the sea. And so this is the only time you really see any color, and so it really stands out.
And she just said something about the gray of the battleship, that when she transferred from Twentynine Palms to the events ashore work, the color came in for a very practical reason, which was the grays.
Yeah, in black and white, your different grays, your dark grays and light grays would just be a different type of grays in the tonality, but you could not capture cold gray versus a warm gray, something organic versus something that's more inorganic. And so that was my reason for wanting to switch to color.
This one's really interesting in terms of controlling the image that the military puts forward. This woman is reshooting this guy's portrait. Wasn't that the story?
Yeah, I think that his cuffs were not the right length, or there was something wrong in his uniform or in his position, and so she had to reshoot his portrait.
Yeah, so that, an inch shows here, and this has to do that, and hat's a certain angle, and, everything is completely prescribed, and every portrait must be exactly the same.
Yeah, and this is in the belly of a nuclear aircraft carrier, the Reagan, actually. But I love the clouds, and I love that idea of what they would like to present to the world, and at the same time, I wanted to show the seams and what's in the background and what's the real thing.
So the next few slides are from a group of works that Anne Mee did for the Coast Guard under the GSA, the representative of whom is here with us today. And 52 of which, I think it is, 53?
Actually, it's 51.
51 are installed at the new Coast Guard headquarters down in Washington, which we had a chance to see earlier in the summer, which were fantastic, but not many other people will ever get to see them.
Unless they make an appointment.
Well, it's kind of difficult. Well, anyway, see that guy over there. Yeah, but it was great to see them. So tell us about working for the Coast Guard.
I became interested in the work the Coast Guard does because I wanted to, Events Ashore started covering so many countries and so many continents, and after Antarctica, I thought I wanted to go to the Arctic, and I knew that the Navy had submarines in the Arctic, and I never thought I could get into a submarine. So, the next easiest thing could possibly be a Coast Guard icebreaker, and so I went on a Coast Guard icebreaker twice, and that work became then known to the person who helped me get the embark, then suggested my work to the GSA when they were building a new headquarters, and I was so thrilled to get the commission.
Yeah, it's a great body of work, but it's interesting because you have people in training classes, but sort of also on active duty or reserve, and
yeah, it's a mix of people on active duty and in training. I basically tried to see everything that the Coast Guard does. It's a bit difficult. I think I had 3 years, but we lost a bit of time with the paperwork at the beginning, so I think I had 2 years to finish the work. So I didn't quite see everything, but I saw quite a bit.
I love the juxtaposition here of these sort of moon suits on this, tall ship.
Yeah, they're like Teletubbies. I thought of my kids. I actually had to learn how to wear one of these when I went on the Coast Guard icebreaker. They're very difficult to put on, but they save lives. So They're called Gumbies.
Gumbies, yes, with good reason. This is one of my favorite shots. You said these guys, they were all standing this way. You didn't say, can you?
Yeah,
Yeah.
waiting for dinner.
Waiting
And
for
for once,
dinner.
I just said, don't move. But they were just perfect. And they didn't move, and they didn't get crisp, and they didn't get uptight.
But there's something in that girl's pocket. Wasn't there some regulation about, there were some things that,
Yeah, I think we didn't really plan on this, but in the end, you know, as just to be on the safe side, we had the pictures scrutinized and vetted to make sure that it was okay for everyone, and it's not regulation to have a water bottle in your pocket. I also had another great portrait of the captain of this ship and his XO, but the XO had his hand in his pockets, and that was not regulation either.
and there was something about shirt
And
logos.
the shirt logos that now are not permitted, so.
So he had the shirt logo of the ship itself, but not the Coast Guard, and that wasn't allowed. It had to be all Coast Guard.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense if you're in the headquarters, you know, and people have to see
You're
it.
proud of all of your ships in your fleet? I don't know. And then I love this one of the fueling.
This was in Thailand, and this was before I received the commission, and I was just really lucky that one of the ship was a Coast Guard ship. It's the scale, and it's, again, that relationship between an activity here, a military operation, and the vastness and the powerful sense of the landscape and the weather and the sea and everything.
Right, yeah, no matter how big your ships are, weather's going to get you. This one kills me, this snowscape. It just goes on forever and ever and ever.
The Icebreaker, the Coast Guard Icebreaker is in the Arctic to support civilian scientists, and I guess perhaps military scientists too, doing research up there. And this was an ice coring.
So they're trying to see how
activity.
thick it is, or just to see what's in the
To see
ice?
What's in, yeah.
What's
They
in the
just
ice?
extract samples
Okay.
for study.
Huh.
And there's the guy on the left of the frame is the bear watch.
The bear watch.
Yes, he has a gun.
Polar
Yeah.
bears, yeah, polar bears. You're not safe anywhere. I love this one because of how the mountain just sort of mists off into the sort of endless sky there. I think it's just wonderful.
This is in Kodiak, and this is the team that actually would get dispatched for any emergency in Dutch Harbor or anywhere in Alaska. So they have been called for the Deadliest Catch and those shows all the time. You see them on.
Ugh. I can't watch those. I really am a bleeding heart liberal, aren't I? Okay, so nobody will be surprised to know that, well, those of you who know me won't be surprised to know this is my favorite one. It's still my favorite one.
Yes.
This is the one that I think sort of sums it all up together. You've got these guys preparing to have target practice on one of their long days at sea. This is on is this an aircraft carrier or destroyer?
This is on a traditional aircraft carrier, the
Carrier.
smaller one.
So you have long days, and so they schedule these shooting practices throughout the days as you're at sea, and so they're setting up their obviously they're setting up their targets, but the longer you look at it, the more they become the targets, and they fit so beautifully into those targets, and then you get these layers of the targets themselves because you can't really see how they're being held up, except for one little sliver between the middle guy's legs. And so then they become kind of pictures floating out there in space. And the idea of, practice while on active duty gets at all the layers of practice and reenactment and pretend and play and within active duty. I think it's just, for me, the one that kind of says it all.
Yeah, this was a great learning experience for me. Yeah, so this picture was made during one of my earliest trips when I started this Events Ashore project and this connection with the ocean. Picking this picture made me realize that it's important, it's not always important to photograph the main action. The main action here is the target practice. And I certainly have photographed these sailors and these Marines shooting, But in a sense, it's not that interesting. We all know what it looks like, or we could imagine it. And so the before and the after, or the peripheral activity could be much more powerful.
Well, so in addition to just the fact that they're practicing their shooting, they're setting up, they're preparing for the setup of the practice of the, like it's another layer, Ben. It's a good one. This is the last slide we have, so if anybody has questions, start thinking about them, because the mic's down there. Are there other things you want to tell us about what's ahead for you?
I'm finishing Events Ashore. I have a...
As a book? Oh, no,
as
the
a book.
series.
Yes, the series is a book, and a couple more trips. And the reason why I'm so excited about this, that I did that commission for the Coast Guard, was that I started making a type of pictures that I probably would not have made on my own, and they could easily be summed up as these groups of people doing things. And I'm thinking that, well, it's kind of nice that they have a uniform, but cooks can have uniforms. So I think it's a lead up for me to be able to completely switch gear, to photograph something perhaps outside of the military.
Right. All right. So just to remind you, the show is on view till February 23rd. And if you are a student, the museum is free, you have no excuse, and you can walk there from here. So I expect to see you all next week. Just remember, the museum does look shuttered. There's scaffolding across the entire front, so don't let that deter you. Just come on in, all right? All right, Gina, you're up. Come on down.
Your work is beautiful, thank you. My question is about your relationship with the people that you encountered, both the active duty and the veteran communities, as they saw what you did. And when military people are deployed, or even in training environments, they often create these collegial relationships. And I was curious about where you fit in those places, because I'm assuming you slept and ate with the military.
It depends on the situation. Yes, there are times where I have embarked on a ship and been part of the crew and doing my laundry with them and eating with them, and even going out, drinking with them when we get to shore for liberty. And so you really bond, and they considered us as part of the crew, and it's really nice. And I think it makes for an easier situation where you could ask for time, so you could make your picture, you could ask for favors, and you could impose on people to help you make your pictures. And there are other times when I actually have a public affairs person, and I'm sort of seen as the one who gets in the way, perhaps. And so it's not ideal. So there are many different situations.
And did you get feedback from veterans about some of the photos you took, particularly with Vietnam?
You mean the Vietnam War reenactments?
I actually mean the Vietnam veterans, the soldiers or people who had actually fought in the war. Did they see your photos and give you any responses?
But the pictures of the Vietnam War reenactments.
Well, but just people in general who have
Both.
seen your work.
Oh,
The pictures
anything.
of that and the
Oh,
pictures
anything.
from like
Well,
Ho Chi
they-
Minh.
Yeah, they look at the pictures of Vietnam and they think, oh yes, we remember the landscape being so beautiful. And then the reenactments, they think it's a joke. And I have brought a friend who was a ranger in Vietnam and has a PhD in military history to help me set up some of the pictures, because he saw the earlier ones and he thought, oh my God, this is so ridiculous. They don't even know how to patrol. I can't let you, continue like this. So he came down and he helped me set up the picture of the plane rescue. That was his idea. He helped me set up ambushes and things like that. And yeah, he thinks it's a joke. He doesn't get it. So
Thank you.
That's a tough one, I think, the reenactments. It's just,
yeah.
I mean, I think you do an excellent job of not making it into a parody of
Yeah, no, I could have.
hillbillies in the sand.
It's so funny because when I started working on it, a friend of mine was working for Talk as a writer, and he had been in Vietnam. He was a journalist in Vietnam, and he said, "Oh my God, that's so amazing! We gotta do this for Talk. I'll write the text." And then I went home and I thought, no, I don't want them to come across as, and sort of, it's much more open and it's more interesting and more complex, then it would have been a one note. So I'm glad I held my ground and did not.
Well, and that's of course, you guys in art school know, that's the beauty of the visual image, is that it leaves open moments for total, interpretation. It's not the written word that's saying you should be thinking this, which of course makes me think I should never have written a word about you. Because I think the photos really speak for themselves. Like once you sort of capture and look for the punctum that says this is North Carolina, not Vietnam, or whichever image you're looking at, that it just pulls you in, and you start looking, and you start thinking, and they grab you in a way that a lot of work doesn't. And I think they're so successful in that way.
Yeah, I think it's nice to have some background information and sort of not think about it and go back and look at the work,
Right.
and you discover new things.
All right, any other questions? Because our time is running shell high.
Hi, ma'am. How are you?
Hi.
I work with the National Guard for training and execution of exercises primarily for domestic response to catastrophes. Curiously enough, I work with the public affairs people for that matter. And I don't come from a military background, and it's been very interesting for me to see the simulacra that everyone is working within to prepare for the ultimately bad catastrophes. So I was curious, one, how aware were the people that were undergoing, particularly the Twentynine Palm training exercises, of the fact that they're in a simulacra preparing for a worst-case scenario, and what was the relationship that you perceived them being aware of that? And also, how curious were they about the work that you were doing? And did they get it? Did they ask about it?
Well, I think in Twentynine Palms, I don't think they were training for the worst possible
No.
situation. I think they were training for what would become, the daily,
A reality.
the reality, yes. I think that there's this tendency in America of over-preparing. I think you think that you can prepare for something, or you can reenact something, and hopefully you can change the outcome. But you can't really. I guess at best you could just hope for the best. I think by overtraining you also become too comfortable, thinking that overly confident, and maybe not be open to the possibility of things being completely different. Because I don't think that you could ever prepare for the real thing. So I think it's a very strange practice.
You must have had to immerse yourself in military culture, being among them, eating their food, and being on out there, the world of acronyms and the very
Yeah, I
rigid sometimes.
actually love it. I get saturated at one point. I'm happy to go home, but then I sort of miss it. So obviously, otherwise I won't keep doing this work.
That's part of why Events Ashore is such a great series, because you're pointing out the global sort of net that the U.S. holds around the world.
It's something I could never have imagined, and the
enormity.
more I traveled, the more I learned about it. And I wish I could go on, because it seems like I haven't really discovered everything. But in terms of them seeing what I do, the fact of having the view camera sort of points to the fact that this is slightly different from, a documentary or photojournalistic
Right,
work.
like
So
blown
if I
the
ever
public
ask them
affairs
anything strange or make them hold something, which I try not to do, and this is like real life training, then they're much more accepting, and they just say, oh, she's one of those. Or I've had the captain of the aircraft carrier Reagan make an announcement on the ship, which is really unusual. They don't do that with visitors unless you're like Dan Rather, when he was still alive, going on. They would welcome him, and he said something like, oh, well, we have this young woman, she's not from the 19th century, but she could look like she's from the 19th century, and she's photographing with, a beautiful camera, so help her out. I don't know, he went on and on, which was really kind of unusual, but nice.
Thank you.
Compared to someone just on that last point, like, Kappa or Nakwe, your images are very quiet and almost serene and somewhat, not glorified, that's not the right term. Well, was that by design? Is that what you're trying to achieve, or is that
Yeah.
just slowing down
Well, it's a mixture of everything. So, you're working with a view camera, so everything is much more deliberate. You can't really capture things instantaneously. So if it's some kind of action, unless there's a lot of light, unless it's been done more than once, or unless I get really lucky with the helicopter or know ahead of time to be ready, it's very difficult. So you have to ask people to do something again, or on the second try. So there's something already about it. I think of myself as a landscape photographer, so I'm interested in scale. So it's always about the activity within the scale of the landscape, and I think Nachtwey and Kappa were interested in the activity itself. They were not interested in context necessarily. I think the three of us have different purposes in our work, and so the work looks different.
Yeah, if you haven't had a chance to see war photography, I'll put a plug in for a show that's not ours at the BMA. Forgive me, Doreen. But it's worth taking the trip up to Brooklyn to see it, because you go back to Crimean and the Civil War all the way up to yesterday. And it gives you both photojournalism and fine art photography. And so the mixing of the two is fascinating.
Well, also, Timothy O'Sullivan, the Civil War, that's with an 8x10 view camera, and it is serene, but at the same time, it's terrifying to see all those bodies thrown on the field, and it's the same process, and I think in a way, it puts you into a mindset that is different than seeing pictures that are very upfront. And I think Kappa used to say, if a picture's not good, it means you were not close enough.
Right.
That works for him, not for me. I actually like to be as far as possible back.
Well, and I think over time that the nature of war photography has shifted, right? They're at the beginning, of course, they couldn't get action fast enough with the cameras they had, so everything was staged and it was after the fact. And then, with Kappa, the closer the better, but those were in the early days of us even having any grasp of what that all looked like. And now people are, Sontag would say, the gorier, the quicker we turn away, and the less effective in the end. So that if you're able to pull back, as Ann Mee does, it makes you think and gives you the sort of comfortable space in which to think about it on a more intellectual basis than that reaction to, oh God, I can't look at that dead body anymore. So there's kind of you can trace the sort of shift in photography and how they've captured wars over the years. It's a great show. You should go see it.
Yeah, but I think.
This is a quick follow-up for you, Ann. As a curator, have you had any conversations with Ann Tucker as to why, kind of as her swan song in Houston, she did this wonderful book and this massive thing on war? She could have curated anything as her swan song. Maybe it's not her swan song, but
It sounds like her swan song.
yeah. Why
Yeah.
did she do that? As a curator, why do you think a curator would choose?
Well,
this subject?
it's the country is sort of immersed in all kinds of war. It's
it's
kind of
important, yeah.
reality.
I think I haven't talked to Ann about it, but she's just retiring, as you probably know. I think it probably took her this long to get it together, because there was a lot of collecting going on. I don't know if you saw it. She's been collecting for Houston's collection since '95 or something, towards the show. So I think it took her that long to build up the collection in order to do it. There are loans, but it's heavily from the Houston collection. And I think I would be immensely proud to have that as my swan song, because it's so dang important. The way that photography can dictate how we think about a conflict is huge. I mean, the government is blocking photographers from, they're so controlling the images now, right? After Abu Ghraib and those images that came out of there. It's important. It's just I think it's the most important thing she's done, personally, but I'm a believer, so.
Yeah, it's a great show.
Yeah, it was so worth it. Tough, but worth it. Okay, hi.
Hi. I'm glad you guys actually started talking about that, because thinking back to Timothy O'Sullivan, when he went out there during the Civil War, he actually moved bodies and he arranged it to make a composition.
Right.
So then that brought, when I was looking at your work, I was thinking about when you went to Ho Chi Minh City and you took the pictures of the people looking at the solar eclipse, which I remember. That happened in '95. But I also thought, now you're going to North Carolina and you're taking pictures once again of a war that happened in Vietnam, and thinking how photography plays as a way of presenting itself as truthful, or the image being a sense of truth, but it also can be a lie. And how do you see your work in that play back and forth between, you know, you're going to these reenactments, you're taking pictures of these soldiers as if they're acting like soldiers, but we're looking at them as if they're soldiers, but they're not. So how do you go on that
I mean,
ideology?
it's interesting that photography has been so connected to that idea of whether it's truthful or not. If a writer wrote a short story, you would never, in a million years, wonder whether it really happened or not. It's beside the point. And so I'd like to say it's beside the point. You know, all I wanted to do was create this picture and suggest something and or create an experience, a visual experience, and whether it really happened or not. But you know, we know it's based in real life, and that's it's influenced by a lot of things and inspired by things that have happened. So it is about the reenactors and it is about the military, but in the end, you know, it's my own fiction.
Okay, one more question? All right. Are there any more? Because this will be our last if not. Okay, good.
So in like all of our thinking of war, our consideration of it, you know, violence is like almost like, you know, violence and power are immediate associations. But through your images, there's like so many suggestions or pointing towards violence, you know, the explosions, the two guns, but there's like, you know, there's no like impact or there's no real like violence within any of your images. I wonder, like, I want to know, you know, what is your consideration of it? Is it, are you always trying to point away from that because you think it's assumed, or is it just a matter of the places that you've been to photograph and have had access to?
Let me answer that.
Yeah, please.
Sorry.
So what Anime is shooting is non-combat military,
Yeah.
right? Okay. So combat-related military is about 5% of the total. There's 1.4 million people employed by the military, and you know 150,000 are engaged in any kind of combat. So it's pointing to this enormous enterprise, which is now jumping out of its role as protecting the country and going to into conflict to protect ourselves, and has engaged in scientific mission, humanitarian mission, all of those things. And so it might bring up the question for you: is that the military's role? Like, what is the role of the military? If does it go beyond protection and conflict? And in our current state, it clearly does, because it's so much bigger than what the combat aspect is. So ANMI has always focused on the non-combat aspect, really.
And also because there have been so many photographers who actually are in combat, and that's what they do, and they do it well. And
So yeah, this is pointing
Yeah.
to a whole section, a huge section of the military that really hasn't been tapped, I would say.
but you're right in terms of, so that's for events ashore, but in terms of the reenactment work, I mean, I could have tried to set up things that were much more violent and much more horrific. And I chose not to because I think we all know what it looks like. I didn't see the point of recreating that. I mean, would it teach us anything new, except I had no interest in reliving it. And, you know, I think it's something that we try to forget. I don't think that it has made us stronger to try. Anyway, I was interested in other things. And so I did, for the reenactments, I did, you know, decide not to include some of those pictures that were more cringing.
Does that answer the question? Sort of. Okay. If there are no other questions, I'd like to say thank you so much for coming down and chatting with us. It's great.
Thank you.